Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and all else, to another episode of 3 Random Creepypastas, the show where I go on the Creepypasta Wiki and find 3 random creepypastas to read. Here we are on episode 7. I'm really glad you guys are still with me, and I'm really blown away by the positive response to this series. I really appreciate the support you guys give me. With that said, let's begin as we find 3 random creepypastas. Let's go! Alright, our very first story is known as Angler, Horrors of the Battlefield. And this story was written, or at the very least added to the Creepypasta Wiki, by a user known as Mr. Evan312. Seems that we're dealing with a war story here, so it may be pretty bleak, but I look forward to see what it's about. Let's read it. Author's note. The subject of this story was on active deployment at an undisclosed location at the time of interviewing, but graciously contacted me via Skype to relay their story. Quotes are taken from a rough transcript. His actual name, as with all subjects of my stories, is changed for privacy reasons. We will call him Jay. Jay described his childhood as being one of rationality, being unafraid of monsters or things that go bump in the dark. Huh. I don't know if this story is based on actual events or not, but due to the author's notes, it almost seems that way, so I don't know. If there was something to be scared of, the human race would have been killed off in the Dark Ages, right? You know, back when all we had to defend ourselves were torches and pointy sticks. Yet here we are today, the dominant life form across the whole damn planet with guns, bombs, satellites, and all these other wonders of modern technology. As I got older, I started realizing that really the primary enemy of humanity is itself. It was this conviction that would spur Jay to join the United States Marine Corps the day he'd turned 19 in November 2001. Spurred on by the horrors of the World Trade Center attack, he cleared basic training and was deployed to the Middle East in mid-October 2002. Like many soldiers in those times, he was wounded, although never severely, and had many close calls to enemy fire and traps like IEDs. He had to take lives when necessary to defend himself and his teammates. In short, he was no stranger to the ways of war. Through it all, he had a sense of pride having made it through intact, both physically and mentally. That would change during a mission in the wilderness foothills of Afghanistan. At some point during the early years of the war in Afghanistan, Jay had attained the rank of corporal and was in charge of a 4-man USMC fire team as their designated officer. His commanding officers had received local intelligence of a large high-priority weapons cache of top-grade weapons in the mountains nearby. According to the source, it included Mk153 SMAWs, extremely potent anti-tank rocket launchers. The cache was also comprised of new AK-104 and AK-02 assault rifles, as well as a number of other weapons far superior to the typical armament of Taliban insurgents. Jay's fire team had then been assigned to protect any arms convoy as part of 2 full squads. Their higher-ups gave Jay and his fellow Marines the assignment to find, secure, and dispose of this cache before it could be used to attack the arms convoy. Setting out under the cover of night with 4 fire teams, they were delivered within 10 kilometers of the supposed objective. They proceeded silently on foot, using thermal night vision to proceed as the thick clouds that night often came over the moon, leaving the area in near pitch blackness. Gotta say, the writing is very strong so far. I mean, my knowledge of army tactics and stuff like that basically boils down to, hey, I played COD when I was young, so I don't know, but I'm enjoying the story so far, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes next. Jay was in charge of Charlie, the 3rd fire team, making up the western flank of the formation with Bravo holding the east and Alpha comprised of 2 fire teams comprising the center. They were advised to be careful and follow the rules of engagement as civilians were likely in the area, and at that stage, the war was already losing public support. With that in mind, the Marines were all on high alert. Several hours into their trek, things started to turn strange. The Alpha squad leader, who was about a kilometer east of Charlie, began communicating with Jay over their radios, reporting a substantial blood trail being located. He emphasized that particular word. Substantial. There were also bloody human handprints and signs of bodies being dragged. It was not impossible to come across the kill site of a leopard or even wolves, although the latter are less common in Afghanistan. It was not unheard of to discover the remains of a human caught off guard and dragged into the wilderness. However, Alpha also reported discarded weaponry, multiple automatic weapons, and many spent shell casings on the ground, indicating automatic fire from multiple combatants taking place. While the Marines were no longer of the belief that animals were to blame for the massacre, they were unsure whether to pin the event on tribal or gang violence, which none of them had ever seen quite like this. After communicating their findings, the Marines were told to proceed with the utmost caution, but Jay described that the worst was yet to come. 15 minutes later, Bravo Squad reported their own findings of a small hillside dwelling that looked recently occupied. Food was on the table and candles were still lit, but there was more fresh blood on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. The rooms were littered with more discarded weapons and spent casings. According to the squad leader, the front door had been torn off its hinges from the outside and flung several meters from the structure. Bravo also located the suspected weapons cache in one of the rooms, having been opened with some of the weapons discarded in the process of being loaded. Jay noted that at this point the Marines were getting spooked, and then communications inexplicably began to cut out, leaving the fire teams unable to report to command and barely able to contact each other. Before the signal was lost altogether, all squads agreed to hunker down in nearby defensible positions and wait for the interference to clear up. Jay and the rest of Charlie proceeded to a neighboring hill and settled into a hollow with an unobstructed view of their surroundings. The weather, which the Marines blamed for the communications blackout, remained clear of rain or severe winds, but the clouds did not thin out, restricting their vision to the thermal optics. Before long, Jay's team identified a group of 7 well-armed insurgents walking in their general directions, all very heavily armed and well-equipped but seemingly unaware of the Marine presence. Having the high ground and a fighter power advantage, Jay's team prepared for a confrontation if the enemy wandered too close. However, as they moved to within earshot, one of the Marines who were more fluent in the local dialect reported that they seemed spooked. Indeed, the Taliban were acting nervous, looking around in all directions and all but stumbling over themselves. If they knew American troops were nearby, they seemed unconcerned. At that moment, Jay spotted an 8th figure approaching the opposing group, bright on thermals like the Taliban. This one was unarmed, a man dressed in a simple white robe that covered his full body as he walked down the hill towards the insurgents. When they noticed the newcomer, they began to yell and point their weapons, screaming even louder and sounding more alarmed. Jay was about to inquire why, but his fellow Marines, who was transfixed on the stranger, pointed out how they were moving. He had not been walking, but instead moved in a swaying motion, his legs immobile and hanging slack. His feet appeared to be several inches off of the ground, and the arms hung limp at their sides. This unsettled even the Marines, one of whom described him aptly as moving like an old marionette-style puppet. Jay was the first to distinguish something even more bizarre the more he observed the figure. Just behind it was a faint, almost indiscernible shape. Something was moving against the background of cooled rock, dust, and sand. All he could perceive was a dim movement like a shadow. The stranger himself was not moving. It was being propelled. And before any of the Marines could react, that is when all hell broke loose. Suddenly, the entire entity showed up bright on their thermal scopes as it began to move much faster. It had not been a single object that Jay had seen. It was a writhing mass of tendrils or limbs slowly uncoiling themselves, and now they darted towards the Taliban like bolts of lightning, grabbing most of them, whipping them around and dashing their bodies against the rocky ground or flinging them into the air. The rapid bursts of gunfire and frantic screams of anguish seemed to do nothing to slow the entity. If anything, they merely seemed to excite or enrage it. One insurgent at the back of the group managed to get out of reach and, disregarding his few surviving comrades, fired an RPG at the attacker. One of the tentacles struck it out of the air off to the side where it detonated harmlessly, and came around to grab the insurgent, seemingly extending itself several meters to do so. Confronted with this abomination well within their kill range, Jay quickly made the decision to extricate his unit, while the unknown attacker was occupied. As they crested an adjacent hill, he looked back and saw, to his horror, that the thing was dragging the massacred Taliban corpses into a maw located in the middle of where the tentacles joined atop the rest of its body. It was consuming those it killed, which explained why they never saw a single body at the previous sites. There was a palpable unease as the Marines quickly regrouped with the other teams, and while the other team leaders believed the story, they all, understandably, agreed to not share what they had encountered with their superiors. The mission had been accomplished, the cache had been located, demolished, and while all known hostiles had been killed in action, thankfully all the Marines were home safe. It was at this point in the interview where Jay became quiet, clearly unsettled, having looked back at what he and his men had experienced. As we concluded our interview, he made this comment in his own words. "I think the event resurfaced some memories from my childhood. The old man was a marine biologist, really into deep sea life. He loved showing me pictures of those fuck-ugly things like the goblin shark, creatures that have every reason to live down there in the dark. He had a sick sense of humor. Mom wonders where I got it. One I recall was the anglerfish, this hideous basketball-looking thing. It lures in prey with this little glowing thing that can move around to get attention. Once the fish gets too close, it opens a mouth that's like 2/3 of its body and boom, fish is gone. That's what we call it now, the angler. Those of us still alive who saw it anyway. God knows where it came from or where it is presently. As far as I can tell, and believe me, I have looked, any further stories of encounters have not made it out into the world. Hopefully, that's just because the commanders of their respective forces have been really good at covering up the stories. Or maybe anyone else who had stories to tell never survived." Author's note. Jay, as far as our most recent communication, is alive and well, having retired from the Marine Corps after 2 consecutive tours, and has adjusted well to civilian life. And that was Angler Horrors of the Battlefield. Alright, that story was really strong, I will have to say. I really appreciated the details of the author's note in the beginning and the ending, adding a lot of believability to the story. I mean, obviously it is fictional, but in the beginning I doubted it because of how matter-of-fact it was written and the way the author was able to describe things in the way that they did. It made the story feel very grounded and real in the beginning before the more supernatural things started to occur. So yeah, all in all, I really enjoyed that, and what I enjoyed really much was the final few paragraphs where the author was describing how Jay said that, oh, you know, it's like that anglerfish and the scary ones that the old man, you know, probably his grandfather or something, was talking about, being a marine biologist, and then having them relate that knowledge to this new terrifying creature that nobody seems to know about. I really enjoyed that detail too, and the reasoning for why they decided to call the monster the Angler. All in all, very interesting story. I would say that was pretty goddamn well written, and I did enjoy it. So all in all, I would probably give that story an 8 out of 10. I was engrossed, I was interested to see where it went next, and I found that the story ended open-endedly, but in a good way. So all in all, good story. Would probably give it an 8 out of 10. With that said, let's find our second story. Alright, our second story is known as Case Murder 18, and it was written by 2 people, it seems, that being Mr. So Happy and Nightmare Foulet. I guess it's supposed to be Nightmare Fuel or Foulet? I don't know, but Nightmare Foulet, that's what I'm gonna say. Really appreciate the username Mr. So Happy, that's good stuff. Let's take a look. My associate and I were inspecting the 3 disappearances this month. We were basically looking for connections to the person or people who would want to choose to harm these people. "Hey Alan, come over here. I think I may have found something," I called out. "You know, we haven't actually asked the friends of the people yet. I think I found our first suspect." I turned the chair and looked towards my associate. "What do you mean?" he asked. "One of the parents of Alyssa, one of the missing children, told us that she disappeared after going to a party with some friends," I told him. "Are you saying a teenage girl did all of this?" Alan said, confused. "Well, we can't just ignore the possibility that they did," I told him. "You can ask them. I don't want to be the person accusing," I replied as he started walking out of the door of my office. I wonder if there was supposed to be a comma there or something, because that was a pretty confusing sentence. It was hard enough to inspect people that had their brain ripped out of their mouth. I wondered why someone would do this, or more of what this purpose would be for. I sifted through the files on all of the missing children and the murdered ones on my desk, but the puzzle wasn't adding up. Why would someone randomly pick up 3 children this month and others in the last 6 months? All of the deaths had added up to 17. Who would be so heartless and cruel that they would torture the poor kids, then murder them so horrendously? It just didn't add up. "Hey Aaron, coming? The office is closing," my associate said to me while standing in my doorway. Yeah, it just doesn't add up, I sighed while standing up and shrugged my coat on. All the way home, I thought of my missing 3 children. Bruce, Teresa, and Blake. And then, that is when it hit me. All of the missing kids were from families with power. I have 3 children, and I am the police sheriff. All of the other kids belong to the mayor and other parts of the government. Maybe if I send someone in undercover, I can catch this sick fuck, and it will all stop. I cried most of the way home missing my 3 children. First my wife, then my children. I fear that luck isn't on my side, or if anything is on my side. When I got home, I found a letter on the door. It read, "Hello, Aaron. I hope you have a happy time." It had a picture of the kids that got murdered. All of the kids. They had no eyes and jaws were broken open, but they all looked like they were smiling at me. I picked up the letter and took it into my house. When I got into my house, I saw a dark red blood trail leading down the hall towards my children's room. I didn't want to follow it, but I was also afraid I had no choice. As I walked down the hall, written in blood on the wall was, "You have a happy face, don't you? You better be happy for a present." The blood trail led into my youngest daughter's room, Teresa, only to see the bottom of her drawing lying on her bed. I dropped the note and started crying. Then I immediately ran into the kitchen and dialed 911. The phone didn't even turn on. I ran to the door and tried to open. The door was stuck. "Oh, you're so funny," said a mysterious voice. And that's how the story ends? Okay, that was Case Murder 18. Very, very short, I will have to say, and ultimately I found that to be a very unsatisfying story. I'm sorry, but I was not grabbed by that story in the slightest. And I don't get what the ending is trying to imply when a mysterious voice says you're so funny. You don't learn anything else, you know? There are just really vague hints in the story of something going on, of like, oh, only the kids of only the kids of powerful families and stuff like that. They're like hints of something going on, but then the story just devolves into like a bunch of like blood and gore and stuff like that, and then at the end you're just left with unsatisfying questions to ask. Ultimately, I wasn't very impressed by that story, which I'm sorry to say. Obviously, I want the authors, both of them, to keep writing, you know, so I don't want to be mean, and if the authors by any chance are watching this video, please do keep writing and make more stories. This one was just not very good to me. I didn't find the writing intriguing at all. I found the dialogue to be unengaging. I think I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 10. It was just too short, too brief, and it didn't go as in-depth as I would have wanted, and it left you with really unsatisfying questions by the end. So all in all, not my favorite story that I've read so far. But like I said, do keep writing. Oh well, we still have one more story to read. Let's find out what our third story has in store for us. Alright, our third and final story is known as My Descent into Darkness, and it was added to the Creepypasta wiki by a user known as FragKiller1. Let's find out what this descent into darkness entails. I am writing this from my bedroom, which to be honest has become the only place I can think clearly ever since I removed the mirror on my nightstand. I will attempt to be as detailed as I possibly can, but every passing day makes it harder to keep my thoughts collected, as you will soon find out. This is not being written and posted to scare any of you, but simply to warn someone of the danger that can come with dabbling in the unknown. Before I progress any further, I want to explain how this all began. To start, I have never been interested in the occult or any type of magic or witchcraft, but after watching the movie Insidious, I found myself becoming more and more enthralled in the idea of lucid dreaming and, to be more precise, astral projection. It all started a few nights after watching Insidious when I experienced a lucid dream. I'm not sure what exactly caused it, but I remember waking up in my living room to the television being on. I can't recall what was playing, but that isn't important. I got up and explored the rest of my house. I went through every bedroom, both of my bathrooms, and I was about to walk out into my backyard to explore further when I felt as if something was off. And just like that, I was awake back in my bedroom. I was so excited about my first lucid dream that I immediately jumped on my computer and researched lucid dreaming. After a few hours scouring the infinite pages of Google, I came across one webpage that referred to astral projection. I thought astral projection was the next logical step in my newfound obsession into the world of dreams. I read up on everything I could find about the subject and eventually became confident that this was an attainable goal, but one recurring theme kept popping up during my research. Never test your limitations when outside of your body. It is better to be safe than sorry. Some web pages provided information about the dangers of meeting ethereal beings that were not friendly to our kind. Beings with less than savory intentions if encountered. I took note of these warnings but thought to myself, how bad could they be? I mean, they aren't even real. Believe me when I say this. They may not be seen in the waking hours of the day, but they are just as real as you and I. They can have a profound effect on your life if they are encountered, especially if you are seen as weak or inexperienced like I was. I feel as if you now have an idea of where I am coming from, so I will continue to my actual experience. I practiced astral projection for around half a year, making steady progress. It always started the same way. I would completely relax my body until I felt a warm sensation take hold of my head and slowly make its way down until my whole body was engulfed in a warm, soft vibration. This was followed by a complete lack of worry. Anything that was bothering me in my life or any stress I was feeling simply melted away. I would sit like this for varying periods of time, almost always in my basement due to the ample room and lack of interference from family members or our 2 dogs. With practice, I became able to intensify these effects to the point where I would feel as light as a feather. I could then open my eyes and would almost always be greeted with the vision of my own body sitting on the floor of my basement. This excited me a great deal, but also scared the hell out of me the first few times. I never knew this was possible, and it made me think about everything else I did not know about the world and our minds. The first few times I made it out of my body and projected, I repeated what I did in my lucid dream I had in the past. I walked around my house examining every room, but this time, everything was so much more vivid. I would see my mother in her craft room just upstairs working on whatever she set her mind on that day, and I could see my father watching television in his lazy boy recliner. I was usually tempted to venture into my backyard, but I was always hesitant because I had never actually left my house and did not know what wonder or danger the outside world held for an astral projector. I seemed to forget about all of the warnings I read about on the web in terms of venturing too far, and one day my curiosity got the better of me. I was determined to go outside. Usually my trips lasted around 30 to 45 minutes in real-world time, but due to the circumstances of trying to venture outside for the first time, I figured I would need a little more time than that. Not wanting to scare my parents in the case of them coming into the basement to find me in a coma-like state with me not being able to see them, I decided to start my meditations at 11 p.m. when they would be going to bed. The meditation went well as it always did. I had a warm buzzing sensation coursing through my body, followed ultimately by projecting outside of my body. I didn't bother to stay in my house for long before making the decision to venture into the yard. It was around 11:56 p.m. when I stepped out of the door into my backyard. I know this because I made a conscious decision to check the time on a clock before I left so as to gauge how long I was gone when I returned. It was dark due to the late time, but in my overzealous confidence I saw it as hardly a problem. I immediately got a strange feeling when stepping onto my deck before reaching the yard. A different feeling I have ever felt before in the times I projected inside my house. I felt sick and uneasy but ventured further into my yard. After all, I had projected specifically to do this. After sufficient exploration of my backyard, walking from end to end and even trying my luck at walking through trees, I decided to make my way back towards the house. As I got closer to the deck of my house, I saw something odd and frightening at the same time. The small window in the wall connected to my basement was glowing as if someone had turned on the lights down there. This was frightening to me for 2 reasons. I did not turn the lights on before I projected, and I thought one of my parents may have woken up and gone to the basement to get something. I worried if they had called an ambulance and how I would explain this to them, but strangely there were no other lights on in the entire house. I ran as fast as I could to the window of my basement to peek in and assess the damage I had caused with my little trip, before making my way down there myself only to be mortified. As I looked through the small window, I saw my body, but it was not sitting in the chair it previously was. My parents did not wake up. They were fast asleep, but something else had woken up due to my empty vessel of a body laying there unattended. I would like to call what I saw a man, or even a woman, but the only word I can muster up is thing. It looked neither male nor female, but had human features such as arms and legs. Its skin was rotting with a stench of decay that permeated through the wall and window into my nose. I don't think it saw me staring at first, as it was busy moving my lifeless body towards the large mirror my mother kept in the corner of the basement. I don't know what caused me to, but I tapped on the glass, as if to inform this monster that the body's rightful owner had returned to take control. Its head jolted up to look at me through the window, and I looked into the sockets where its eyes should have been. I felt ill just by the sight of this thing's face, but even more so when it didn't move, but rather beckoned me to the basement with its one bony finger. I rushed into my house through the kitchen and down the 2 flights of stairs to get into my basement, not fully aware of what would happen when I got there. I fully expected to encounter this being when I opened the door and looked into the room, but to my surprise, it was not there anymore. The lights were off as they were before, which made it all but impossible to see more than outlines. I flipped the lights on to find just my body in the room, except for one thing. My body was just inches away from the mirror, with my head facing towards the mirror. It was as if this thing was trying to drag me through the mirror, for reasons I would rather not know. I took a deep breath and got back into my body, all but through with the business of astral projection and hoping to leave the encounter behind me. I was wrong. It has been weeks since this happened to me, and I haven't attempted to project once, but there is something about mirrors now. I can't even look into a mirror without feeling sick, and I swear I can see this thing standing behind me when I look in my mirror with the lights off. I constantly feel like someone is watching me, and I can barely sleep now. Even when I do sleep, I always have the same lucid dream. I wake up in the dream in my backyard as the events of that night play out again. I go to the window of my basement to see it dragging my body towards the mirror. Only in the dreams, the thing is fully aware I am there, even before I make it to the window. The disturbing thing is that, in every dream, it drags me further and further into the mirror, to the point where almost half of my body is through the mirror. I am afraid to sleep. I'm even afraid to be around mirrors at this point. I don't know what will happen if or when this thing gets my body through the mirror in the basement. Every day, I am feeling less and less like myself, and as I stated before, this isn't meant to scare anyone. It is simply a warning. These things are real, and whether or not you have ever seen them, they are here. If you ever do decide to project and see this thing, contact me immediately if I'm still here. I feel as though our chances would be better as a group. And for the love of God, stay away from the mirror. Alright, that was my descent into darkness. In the beginning of the story, I was a little unsure of it. I didn't know exactly where it was going or what I was doing. It did go fairly in-depth about lucid dreaming and astral projection and stuff like that, which was interesting to know about, but I was a little unsure at first. I was like, okay, where's the story going? Can we get going? But once the story picked up, and once this really weird monster appeared and started dragging the main character into the mirror and stuff like that, which was a really, really interesting and creepy concept, I will have to say. Astral projecting and then seeing this frightening monster taking your real lifeless body and dragging it into a mirror. It's a freaky thing to think about, so I felt when that happened, when the monster appeared and when the author was dashing down into the basement to get a look at it, I felt that was really intense, and that's when the story really became alive, and that's when I wanted to know what would happen next. Then, of course, the story ends, and in this case, I felt the story ended satisfyingly. I felt it ended exactly when it needed to, with the author being unsure and scared of what this creature was doing, and what would happen if the author's entire body were to be dragged into the mirror. You know, you don't need to know this stuff, and it's very interesting to think about. So like I said, in the beginning I was a little unsure of the story, but once it picked up, it really did pick up, and that's when I really enjoyed the story. I am feeling generous towards this story, so I'm gonna hit it with a 7 out of 10. Once it picked up, it really did pick up, and then I found it to be very enjoyable, and it had some really interesting concepts in it, like being dragged into a mirror by this nightmare creature, and being afraid of, wondering what would happen next. I felt the story really capitalized on, you know, the fears of lucid dreaming and astral projection, in a really interesting and enjoyable way, which made the story rather hectic and intense when that happened, which I did enjoy. And that's basically all I have to say about our 3 stories. And those were 3 random creepypastas. We had pretty good luck with the first story, the second story was and the third story was also pretty good, I would say. So kind of a mixed bag this time around, but what can you do? Thanks for watching, everyone! If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and comment your thoughts down below. Don't forget to also subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Check out my social medias over here, or my Patreon page if you want to support the channel directly. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay awesome. Goodbye.